What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's very interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet. We're living on a rock and seeing this video for the first time. I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. Today's video, ladies and gentlemen, is presented by Profit X. And I want to tell you a little bit about Profit X because a lot of you that watch this video love to bet on sports. And Profit X is the newest and future of sports wagering. Let me tell you why. In a lot of states around the country, you cannot bet with normal sports books. You can with Profit X. They're considered a sports prediction sweepstakes exchange. You're betting against other people or your own odds that you create. Hence, you get the best odds in the US. Now, people in Texas, California, Montana, Alaska, you may not have sports betting. You do have Profit X. It's available in up to 40 states around America. Trade now on a platform where you're always going to generally get the best line. I use it. You should too. Click the link in the pinned comment and get involved with Profit X now to bet the NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball, hockey, and more right now. Let's get in, everybody, to yet another very interesting organized crime topic. And there have been hundreds of videos made about John Gotti over the years. That said, today, I think we're going to delve into something not talked about very often when it comes to John Gotti and the family secrets of the Gotti name. I want to delve into John Gotti's father. What do we know about John Gotti Senior, the father of John Gotti? What do we know about mystery brothers that we didn't know that the John Dapper Don Gotti had? Let's get into the very interesting family tree of John Gotti's father and extended family. The story next on the sit down. Now, I am going to get into the fact that we do know John Gotti was born on October 27th, 1940. His early life, at least his toddler years and up until approximately 8 to 10 years old, his family lived in the Bronx. As far as what we know, according to census and property records, the Gotti family in 1940 lived at 942 East 215th Street in the Bronx in a walk-up apartment. Now, East 215th Street is only approximately 3 blocks long, and it's in the Williamsbridge section of the Bronx. Now, at the time the census was taken in 1940, John Gotti, the one that we know, wasn't actually born yet. In the summer of 1940, the Gottis had actually 4 children by that point. John and his wife, Fanny DiCarlo, had 4 children. They include Carmine, Rose, Lucille, and Peter, who we all know followed his brother into the life of the mob. Now, before we get into kind of the mystery brother, I want to tell you a little bit about John Gotti's father, because there's a lot to discuss about a lot of inaccuracies that have come out over the years about John Gotti's family. And at one point, John Gotti actually talked about the fact that, these authors, they're no different than us. I mean, they claim that my parents are both from Italy, which they're not. And that's exactly correct. John Gotti's father, John Joseph Gotti Sr., was born May 29th, 1907. And from what I had found, there's a lot of connection to the area of Mount Vernon, New York, which we'll get to. Now, John Joseph Gotti Sr., John Gotti's father, his father, Carmine, and mother Rose were both from Italy. Now, Carmine Gotti, which would be the John Gotti that we know's grandfather, was born in approximately 1870. And he and his wife, Rose, came over in 1899. They had a large family themselves, and one of their children was John Joseph Gotti Sr. As of 1930, they lived in Mount Vernon, and John Gotti Sr., John's father, was the oldest of 8 children. So they had a big family as well. And I know that the Gotti family gets really confusing because there's a lot of Johns, there's a lot of Carmines, there's a lot of the same names. So I'm going to do my best to try to reference the right one. But when we hear John Gotti Senior, it's not John Gotti Senior, really. John Gotti, the one that we know, the Dapper Don, this guy, is actually John Gotti Jr., and his son, John Jr. Gotti, is actually the third John Gotti. So a lot of confusion there. That said, at any rate, he would marry Philomena Fanny Gotti, who I'll get to here in a second, and kind of build the family tree. Now, in 1930, according to that census, at 23 years old, John Gotti Sr.'s job at that point, at the age of 23, was a presser in a factory. He would ultimately meet Fanny Gotti, who was born in 1913 in New Jersey. Now, I don't believe she spent much time in New Jersey because according to censuses, right before that and even after that, there's no mention of New Jersey. There's a lot of Westchester, the Mount Vernon area. It may just mean that she was born at a hospital in New Jersey. I don't know that she actually lived in New Jersey, according to the records that I had found through ancestral programs and things of that nature. And we would ultimately find that Miss Philomena, who was actually born Philomena DiCarlo, by 1925, her family actually lived in Mount Vernon, which between the years of 1925 and 1930, approximately around 1930, she likely met John Gotti because the two would ultimately marry in 1932, October actually of 1932, and they would be married in Mount Vernon, New York, eventually moving to the Bronx between 1932 and 1934, because we know that their first child, now we're getting into John Gotti, the Dapper Don, we're getting into his familial tree now, where his parents, Philomena Fanny Gotti and John Gotti, their first son was a kid named Carmine Gotti. He was born in 1934, as far as we know. Now, what's interesting about the Gotti family is we find that they actually had 13 children. That said, 2, from what I understand, were stillborn. So they eventually had 11 total children, and I'll list them in a second. But their first son was Carmine. He's largely forgotten due to the fact that we didn't really ever know that he existed. Now, we have heard that John Gotti's children have mentioned that they did have our Uncle Carmine, but there's not a lot known about him. The only thing that we do know is that in 1957, John Gotti's brother Carmine was actually arrested alongside another male. They can be seen here, a person called John Gilbert. They were arrested for a local holdup of a gas station, and that they were improperly prisoned unjustly for about 6 months. Eventually, luckily, they were released after a man called John Masha confessed to the crime. Eventually, Philomena Fanny Gotti and her son Carmine are featured in the news. Now, by this point, the Gotti family moved to Brooklyn. We know at approximately 1950, they lived in Brooklyn due to the fact of the census records back then, and they were actually featured in the newspaper. Eventually, even in 1964, Carmine Gotti was featured on a program called Victims of Injustices, which was pretty hard in actually locating. There was no cast listed or anything, but he was featured for 2 hours on that program where he discussed being arrested unjustly and that sort of thing. Now, I want to back up a little bit. Now, it is unknown whatever happened to Carmine Gotti. There's no real records, and we can venture to believe that he likely just had a normal life. And, like most of the Gotti family, about half of them were women and or other sons. They were not involved with the life, obviously. Obviously, many of them were, including John Gotti and his other brothers. But by 1950, this was the Gotti family seen here. So There were obviously John and Fanny, the parents, and their sons and daughters. Son Carmine, daughter Rose, daughter Lucy, son Peter, son John Gotti Jr., son Richard, daughter Marie, son Jean, son William, daughter Patricia. So notice that is 10 kids there as far as what we can see. Now, there is one son that is not listed. That would be Vincent Gotti. He was born after 1950, and that did not show up on the 1950 census. Now, notice Peter, John, Richard, even Vincent, they all enter the life. But I want to quickly discuss, you see a brother listed here called William Gotti. Now, we've referenced him at kind of a short level at one point, but William Gotti, like his brother Carmine, was the only brothers that did not enter the world of the mob. In fact, in the 70s, William Bill Gotti, seen here, actually worked at one point on the New York Stock Exchange. And he would eventually enter the world of working in the deli business and decided that he wanted to get out of the city. He would state, quote, "In a number of ways, it was kind of hectic. I always wanted to raise my kids in a calm atmosphere." He would eventually choose to work at a deli and eventually owned a place called Victor's Square Restaurant and Delicatessen in West Hollywood, California. And he would eventually sell that approximately 15 to 20 years ago. Now, Bill Gotti was asked in an article that he did with the LA Times about his brother John and his other brothers that were involved with the mob. He would state, quote, "There's no family code that you have to behave like so-and-so. Each of us chose our own paths, and I chose what I thought was more culturally inviting for me." Now, Bill Gotti has not really ever talked about his brothers, and he's 100% right. Just because your family's involved with something doesn't mean that has to be your life. And we actually credit him as being, at least in our opinions, one of the true heroes of the Gotti family, a person who did good for society and eventually was able to teach his children likely the same thing. He does have an infamous last name, but that wasn't his, life. And that doesn't have to be his life or anybody involved with the Gotti name. Now, as I said, the youngest son and child, Vincent, would also enter the life. Now, when it comes to the Gottis and their son, John, they were actually approached multiple times by the FBI, including one instance in 1954 where the FBI did make contact with John and Fanny Gotti, to which the report claims the subjects did not contact, or noticed that they stated that the subject, John Gotti, did not contact them, and they had had a falling out with him since his marriage approximately 2 or 3 years ago. They would further claim that they did not have any information that would assist in locating the subject after the FBI was looking to find out his whereabouts. Now, we would eventually find, though, that it seems like John Gotti and his father and mother did eventually mend the fences a little bit, and we would see them in various photos over the years together. Now, what I did find interesting, according to Mikey Scars, DiLeonardo, he would state that John Gotti, his father, was seen regularly, according to him, in the late 80s at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, and that he was in no way connected to the mob, but he just enjoyed hanging out around his sons and, playing cards and things of that nature. We would also find out that, throughout the years, there's been cultural reason to believe that John Gotti's father was a bit of a deadbeat, which I found interesting because in a lot of the documents surrounding his father, there's not a lot of work history as far as from what I can see. In 1940, his job was listed as a chauffeur, according to census records. However, when we look at the 1940 war registration cards, it was listed that he was unemployed, according to him. We do know that, according to census records. His parents were from the area of Naples, and John was Napolitan. But there's not a lot of work history. John Gotti would talk about down the road that, his father, didn't provide very much, and that he never really worked a day in his life. He was a bit of what John would call, quote, rolling stone. And then he never worked a real day in his life. We would also find out that he was a bit of a problem gambler. He did enjoy horse betting and playing cards and craps and things of that nature. Now, he was also seen in various wedding photos. Here he can be seen at his granddaughter's wedding, his granddaughter Victoria. There they can be seen with Connie Francis. And what's interesting is at John Gotti's acquittal in 1987, John Gotti Senior was actually approached by a reporter, and he actually commented on his son's acquittal, stating that the verdict was a, quote, surprise, and he thanked God that it happened that way. So his son was actually surprised that his son had gotten off. Sadly, though, 3 days after his son was sentenced to life in prison in 1992, John Gotti Sr. would die from cancer at the age of 85. He's buried, and his tomb can be seen here. Now, his wife, Philomena Fanny Gotti, would actually live approximately 15 years more. And in fact, she would actually outlive her son, John Gotti. Fanny Gotti would eventually work as a meat cutter in a local grocery store and would actually live alongside her daughter, Marie, in Valley Stream, Long Island, before eventually retiring into a retirement home where she would die in 2008 at the age of 96 years old. She would live deep after her husband and several years even after her son, who died in 2002. She lived approximately 6 years, dying on August 26th, 2008. So I wanted to kind of do this video because I've noticed that no one's really ever covered this. We always have heard so much about, John Gotti and Peter Gotti and Jeannie Gotti and all these different Gottis, but we don't know much about John Gotti's father or mother, for that matter, and where they kind of came from. I would find out that, Philomena DeCarlo, Fanny Gotti, her maiden name is DeCarlo, as I said. There's not a lot really known. It seems like her father, Donato, was a pretty normal guy. All in all, they were kind of a normal family. Obviously, there's a bunch of daughters that, were the sisters of John Gotti, Marie, Lucy, Rose. They all kind of went on and had their own lives. They had their own kids. There are a lot of Gottis, man. Now, again, that name stops with the daughters due to the fact that they don't marry Gottis, but there's a lot of Gottis out there, a lot of extended family. These are big, big, big families. And what is noticeable about the Gotti name is, while it is infamous, there are so many Gottis that had nothing to do with the mob. They were just normal people that had normal jobs, normal lives. And as I said, the name doesn't have to define you. While some of the family has taken, kind of the public spotlight and wanted to write books and things of that nature, widely, a lot of them don't. They just have many normal lives and just kind of blend into normal society. There is more to the Gotti name than it just being infamous. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do me a favor, hit that like button and hit that thanks button below the video if you care to contribute to the family here. Or not family, but the Sit Down family, if you will. I'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.